A reading from the Gospel of Mark. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, Let us go across to the other side. And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him up and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith? And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Never wake a sleeping Jesus. No telling what might happen. Of course, Jesus didn't need to be wakened to know what was going on, never does. He's woke to all that's happening around him in ways we ourselves should want to be woke. Unfortunately, we often prefer to remain asleep to those things that are inconvenient to us, right? The language of wokeness is everywhere today, and it's being weaponized by some in terrible ways. Instead of taking seriously the issues that issue from wokeness, wokeness is made to be the issue. More on that in a moment. But for now, let's take a look at this story from Mark's Gospel and try to see some things in it that we might miss if it weren't for a more wakeful reading. Jesus sets out with his disciples in a boat on a lake. He has just been teaching, healing, exorcising demons among his own people on the North Shore, and he is exhausted. But this isn't going to be a vacation cruise to nowhere. He is going somewhere in particular. Let us go across to the other side, he says. Now, this is important and easily missed. What's on the other side? Others. Jesus is intentionally going into Gentile territory where the others live. Now, Jews avoided Gentiles like the COVID. Gentiles were idolaters, after all. They ate pork, and they were ceremonially unclean, polluting their bodies with behaviors that would exclude them from a Jewish perspective. And of course, they were Roman sympathizers, right? Sort of like poor white people. Even if they didn't have power themselves, they supported the powers to be that oppressed the Jews and occupied their land. And we shouldn't miss what's happening here. Mark is showing us that Jesus will not confine his ministry to people like him. This changes everything and immediately makes him less popular with his own people. See, the popular understanding of the Messiah was that he would come to rouse the slumbering Israel in order to throw off the Roman oppressors and return Jews to self-rule in their own land. Gentiles were the enemy. They were not themselves people who needed to be liberated. And yet, this is what Jesus does. His understanding of messiahship is rooted in a vision of the salvation of the whole world. See? to be Messiah in Jesus' understanding is that the whole world will be saved through Israel, not just that Israel will be saved. We too have to wake up to this. We let identity politics get in the way of our theology and mission. See, what needs to happen is our theology and mission should determine our politics. A friend once told me years ago about when he moved to Dallas and was looking to find a church. He was from the Midwest, and so he first started attending a church that was more prominent from his own tradition, from where he had come, and he was feeling somewhat comfortable there, and the pastor came to the house for a visit, and so my friend asked him about the church's mission. The pastor said that he understood their mission to reach people like them in Dallas, which I'm sure maybe he meant people from their own spiritual or denominational heritage. But my friend became quickly uncomfortable and thought that unconsciously what the pastor was really saying is that their church wasn't a fit for everybody. There were some kinds of people that probably weren't part of their mission. And I think my friend was more woke to the church's true mission than that pastor was. When the church is content to stay within its geographical or demographical bounds, it has no gospel to share. It becomes another social club or service club of like-minded or like-skinned people. By definition, I tell you, the church is a trespassing community, always crossing borders with the good news. As the late Rachel Held Evans said time and again, what makes the gospel offensive is not who it keeps out, but who it lets in. But this doesn't apply only to the church. See, there's a popular mistaken notion going around these days that there's one code of ethics for the church and another for the world. That there's one way of treating people who are sisters and brothers in the church and another strangers outside in the world. That somehow love and compassion should rule inside the church, and then law and order outside the church. Jesus makes no such distinctions. Instead, the way the church lives together should be the template for how the world lives together, which is why it undermines the gospel when we eagerly send missionaries to care for all the spiritual and material needs of desperate people in Central America. And then we treat those same desperate people inhumanely when they cross our national border, even if illegally. They don't stop being human beings created in the image of God when they cross borders created by human beings. Jesus is always calling us to cross over to the others, on the other side. Whether the other side means the other side of the lake, or the tracks, or the border. But when we do, be assured of this: the wind and the waves will kick up. Nature doesn't want us to mess with the settled ways things are. Tumult will follow any attempt to cross over and include everybody. Tempests will rise. This is not a sign that we are doing something wrong. It's a sign that we're doing something hard. Now, best scholars can tell Mark is the first person to name the Sea of Galilee the Sea of Galilee. Interesting, huh? See, it went by many other names, still does, like Lake Gennesaret or Lake Kinneret or Lake Tiberias. But Mark is the first to call this freshwater lake a sea. Why do you think? Because the sea conjures up all sorts of images of monsters of the deep, full of dangers and death. It also recalls stories from Israel's history, like what happened to Jonah, for instance. Remember, Jonah refused to go to the Gentiles in Nineveh, and he boarded a ship where? In the sea, the Mediterranean Sea. Result, a violent storm blew up, and Jonah knew that he had to sacrifice himself in order to save those who were in the boat. But in this case, Jesus shows his lordship over all the elements by addressing them sternly and rebuking them. He quiets them with an authority we can only attribute to divine power. The words he uses are peace, be still, right? And they recall the words from Psalm 46, which after all the language of the chaos of nature and the storms that make human beings afraid, enter God who speaks and says, "Be still and know that I am God." The Hebrew should probably be translated something like, stop, let go, as if he is telling nature to stop creating fear in human hearts. Jesus is awake to the invisible systems of injustice in the world that keep people from experiencing the abundant life God intends for everyone. Like the storms of nature, we see and feel their effects, but we don't see the causes. And like the disciples, when the storms rage, we are apt to become fearful and just want them to stop, rather than see them for what they are. Systemic racism is like that. We just saw Congress pass a law that makes Juneteenth a national holiday. It took 2.5 years from President Lincoln's signing of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 before the slaves in Galveston, Texas, learned that they were free. Why 30 months to get the word from Washington, D.C. to Texas? It's not, I tell you, because they didn't have email. It's because the word had to pass through the Confederacy. The Confederacy was an evil ideology that opposed human freedom for chattel slaves. And the word had to break through that storm of opposition before peace could come. It's as if Jesus was speaking to the tumult of the Civil War, saying, "Peace, be still." And he is still speaking into our tumult today, when people are saying that to tell the truth about these invisible forces that rob people of color of their freedom and opportunity is divisive. No. What is divisive are the current systems of injustice that are no gospel, no good news at all. But then Jesus turns to the disciples. And by the way, anytime Jesus turns to the disciples in the Gospels, we should read that he's turning to us, right? And he chides them and us for having so little faith. They respond by marveling about his power even over the chaos of nature, which represents in their minds the forces of evil and death. I just returned yesterday from Orlando, Florida. It was a trip for our 11-year-old grandchild, Finley. Hi, Finley. See, each grandchild gets to choose a place in the continental U.S. to go with Gideon Pops. And I think I probably just cost a lot of you money. Anyway, Finley is a huge fan, so we went to Universal Studios to experience the wizarding world of Harry Potter. I was amazed at the crowds. Didn't matter if you arrived early or late. Reminded me of church, don't you know? Early service, late service, oh, the lines to get in are ridiculous. But now let me pull my tongue out of my cheek for a moment and say something to you. Why is Harry Potter more interesting to us than Jesus? J.K. Rowling is on record saying that the Christian story is the meta-narrative behind and what animates her tale. And in both stories, the Gospel and Harry Potter, they deal with the invisible forces of evil that manifest themselves in the swirling chaos and with human fear. And in both cases, the chosen ones have the power of goodness on their side to speak words of rebuke to those forces and bring peace. And when people read Harry Potter or go to the movies or go to the theme parks, I tell you, they are all in. They are excited. But when we read a story like this, about the power of Jesus to calm the storm with a word, our minds can barely believe it, and our hearts barely register the excitement. And yet, people, it's all here. The magic, the wonder. Jesus doesn't even need a wand. I don't know the answer exactly, but I think it has something to do with being asleep to what God is up to all around us all the time, including in this most magical place, the church. Woke Jesus, the risen one himself, is calling us to wake up to the powers we have. And imagine what might happen if Jesus woke a sleeping church. Amen.